Good morning. If everyone will take their seat, we'll get started.
Good to see you.
Thank you all for being here. Today is July 10th, and we have a special informational Sports Authority Board of Directors meeting today. We are pleased to be back at Nissan Stadium. We appreciate the Titans for hosting us, and I'm sure before too long we will all be back here in this facility watching some football, the other football, the first football. So thank you all for having us today. The appeals process for any action of this board can be found at the top of today's agenda. And with those items noted, we will get started. And today we will review the MLS Stadium documents. I believe John Cooper with Metro Legal will kick us off.
And as he's coming up, I would also just say, this is an information session only, so the board will not be taking action today. Next Thursday, we will be back here at Nissan Stadium, and the board will be asked to vote on the agreements that will be walked through this morning. And then I also would just want to point out that Laura Womack is, well, she moved. Laura Womack, the executive director of the fairgrounds, is here, and Mary Cavara, Ron Gobble, and Michelle Scopel, our project managers. And we have a list of people. We've got guests from the mayor's office and the finance department, and so a lot of people who can answer whatever questions that you have.
All right. Well, thank you very much for making time to come to a special session. I hope that it will be informative. Just to start off, as a reminder, the key deal terms were approved back in November when the council approved the initial bond resolution. That was a conditional approval. It had a list of conditions, some of which included approval of the agreements that are going to be discussed today. These agreements are the result of months of negotiation with the team. We have Margaret and then Tom Cross, our associate law director, and I negotiated on behalf of Metro, and we retained Craig Hammond with Dickinson Wright in Detroit to help us to make sure that we were not missing things. He is an expert in stadium deals and municipal financing, and he negotiated the development agreement for the Detroit Pistons when they relocated to the Little Caesars Arena. So he's very, very familiar with how deals are structured and things to include, make sure things that are included. This deal is unlike any other pro sports deal that we've had in Nashville. And that's a good thing. It's a collaborative effort with the team. And the key difference, really two key differences. First is the team is responsible for the lion's share of the debt service on the stadium construction. So they are bearing the brunt of the risk on debt service. They're also responsible for all cost overruns, which has not been the case previously. So that will protect Metro and the Sports Authority to make sure that if costs do exceed what's budgeted, then they are responsible for 100% of those. The team has since they are responsible for those costs, they have a vested interest in making sure that the stadium is built on time and on budget. And the Sports Authority and Metro have a vested interest in making sure it's built well and will last. So that's kind of the collaboration there to make sure those things are met. The team has retained ICON as its project representative. ICON is a leader in the sports facility consulting field. I think they've been involved in over $8 billion worth of stadium deals, including Atlanta, Orlando, and Barcelona for soccer. So it was determined, and this we'll get into more detail when we get into the agreements, but it was determined that ICON was best suited to kind of oversee the day-to-day construction and to report to the Sports Authority representatives and have regular discussion regarding that, but there needed to be a point person, and it was determined that Icon was best suited to do that. Let's see, do we have the PowerPoint? Is it up?
They have a copy in their packet.
Oh, okay. All right, good.
An additional behind tab 6 that was left on the table, and I'm not sure if it's queued, is it queued up on the?
Alicia, well, is Alicia here?
That's fine. As long as y'all have it, then
Yeah,
that, yeah, that's fine. Okay. So there are 6 agreements that the Sports Authority will be, or that are part of this deal. The first is a ground lease between the Sports Authority and the Fair Board for the actual stadium footprint itself. Then there is a stadium lease or a team lease with the MLS team, between the Sports Authority and the MLS team. And within that are 2 agreements, a guarantee agreement and a development agreement. And then we will have a construction administration agreement, and finally, a construction management agreement. Unfortunately, these all kind of sound alike, so it's hard to keep them separate, but I will try and do that.
John, is your presentation, is it essentially the same material as the memo? that
It
you
is,
provided?
yes.
Okay, just looks
Yeah, it's shortened.
shortened.
Yes. So start off with a summary timeline for the various approvals that will be required. We have today's information session. Tomorrow, we will have the same presentation to the Fair Board. On July 17th next week, the Fair Board will be asked to approve the ground lease. And then on the 19th, the Sports Authority will be asked to approve the agreements that we're going to discuss today. After that, the council will consider the required legislation in August and September. The construction management agreement will be presented to the Sports Authority either at the August 16th meeting or at the next meeting, depending on the procurement schedule, and I'll get into that more. So then final approval from the council would be in September, and the revenue bonds would be issued sometime late fall before the end of the year is the anticipated schedule. I'll first talk about the ground lease between the Sports Authority and the Fair Board. This is a 30-year agreement to mirror the terms of the stadium lease and the debt service. The Fair Board will have no financial responsibility for the construction of the stadium. That is all covered under, I'll get into the funding sources, but the Fair Board is basically just leasing the property as is. The Fair Board will be consenting to the team lease agreement, which is incorporated into the team lease as a sublease of the ground lease. So they will be, while they're not a direct party to the team lease, it is incorporated into the ground lease to which they are a party.
And John, I think you're referring to the lease agreement, which is behind tab 2 of everyone's packet. And so you'll go document by document?
Yes, I'll go document by document. And if you have questions at any point, feel free to stop. Unfortunately, the PowerPoint is not in the same order that the summary is, but the summaries have the title of the documents on them. So you should be able to refer back to that.
So we're starting with the...
We're starting with the ground lease.
The ground lease.
Yeah.
Actually, I think that's a different...
The team lease survives the ground lease.
Tab 4.
Okay, I don't have what you have, so,
I just want to make sure we're all starting from the same place.
Okay.
so that- Thank you.
okay.
Thanks.
So the Fair Board will be consenting to the team lease as part of the ground lease, and the team lease will survive the ground lease in the event that lease is ever terminated for some reason. There's a standard recognition, non-disturbance, and attornment agreement that's incorporated into the ground lease, basically just ensuring that the team lease stays in place regardless of whoever owns the property or the parties of the ground lease. The lease also includes a list of prohibited uses that are included in your summary. Those are fairly standard, but it's, ensuring there's no nuisance or sexually oriented businesses or industrial uses, things that are noxious uses. I mean, this is for the purposes of a stadium, and that's what the ground lease will reflect.
And the ground lease is what the Fair Board is reviewing tomorrow and what requires action from the Fair Board.
Correct. That's the one agreement that the Fair Board will be approving at this point. All of the other agreements, the Sports Authority will be acting on as well. Next, I'll move to the development agreement.
Before we move on, are there
Any questions on the ground lease?
Thank you.
Okay.
That one's pretty standard.
Yes, that's the
You're just
shortest of the documents. The next is the development agreement.
And that is tab 3.
This agreement is between the Sports Authority and Walsh Management, LLC. Walsh is a wholly owned subsidiary of the team. Walsh is one of the roads that goes through the fairgrounds. That's where the name came from. So this development agreement is for the construction of a 30,000-plus seat stadium. Pursuant to Metro Code requirements, it will be LEED Silver certified. This is a cooperative effort, as I said, between the Sports Authority and the team, since the team is bearing the bulk of the debt service. As I mentioned, ICON will be serving as the team's or as Walsh's representative, and Ron Gobble and CPS will be overseeing the project on behalf of the Sports Authority. As part of the development agreement, there will be a development committee that is established. The purpose of the development committee is to facilitate communication and cooperation throughout the construction process. This will be a 4-member committee, 2 representatives from the MLS team and 2 from the Sports Authority. It will be up to the, Ron Gobble will serve as one of the members, and then the other member, it will be up to the Sports Authority to decide. That could be either Monica or a Sports Authority member. The team's rep will serve as the chair of the development committee. And as I said, their purpose is to work together throughout the design and construction process to address issues as they come up and just make sure that we have a smooth process. In the event there is a dispute about a change order or something that would have an adverse impact on future capital needs, then the approval of the committee would be required, and they would have to have some good faith negotiation to make sure that the Sports Authority's interests are protected in the event they wanted to change something that could result in a greater capital expense or a capital expenditure earlier than would otherwise be required.
John, can you address this authority of ICON and not the Sports Authority to make a decision in case there is a deadlock, particularly since we're talking about capital expenditures and that is Metro's responsibility and not?
Right. So if if there was an impasse, I mean, the agreement requires that there be good faith efforts to resolve that dispute.
I understand that, but if there is an impasse, the way this is written is that the soccer club representative would make the ultimate call on that as to capital expenditures when it's Metro that is responsible for the capital expenditure.
Well, it would really be, they would make the call on things that don't have capital requirements. If there is a dispute, then that's when we would have to have a good faith negotiation and possibly bring in a third party to mediate if we could not come to an agreement on that, something that would have a capital expenditure impact.
So why is it that since Metro owns this seems to be different. First of all, is this a deal point that the council passed? Is this something that's just been negotiated?
Icon was not, that was not part of the, at the time, they hadn't gotten that far down the road.
So why is it that our representatives, Capital Project Solutions and Ron Gobble, are not making those ultimate decisions instead of the...
Well, it was, as I said, it was determined a while ago that Icon has the experience to do this, and Metro does not. I mean, we have, obviously, Ron and our representatives can oversee the project and make sure that it's being built appropriately, but as far as day-to-day oversight, it was determined that Icon was best positioned to do that. And from a construction management standpoint, I mean, the construction manager is going to have someone that makes decisions. And so that was to facilitate and make sure it gets built on time.
Do we have an agreement with Icon ourselves, Metro?
Metro does not, no. That's just the team. We have an agreement. There's a separate construction administration agreement that is with the team that spells out Icon's responsibilities.
And we are privy to that?
Yes, that's one of the agreements that will be approved.
And may I point out, it's page 6, as it refers to the Development Committee Chair. It says the committee chair will be the final decision maker on all cost-related items that would not reasonably be anticipated to have a materially adverse impact on the authority's future capital expense obligations under the lease.
Right, so that's for those that don't have a material impact.
So otherwise, it's essentially the committee, the development committee that has purview over the day-to-day.
Yes, Icon will report to the development committee, and the development committee is required to meet regularly throughout the process.
Does Icon have experience with public financing of stadiums?
Mary, do you?
Yes,
Public
they do.
financing?
Pardon me?
With stadiums that have been built with public financing?
I'd have to get you the list. I don't know off the top of my head.
Yes.
Yes, they do.
Not.
Yes.
Okay.
My question may arise just basically from the summary that has been provided. I just want to get real clear on what Icon's responsible relationships between parties. You've got the team, and then the team has a subsidiary, Walsh Management. Mm-hmm. And Walsh Management is the lessee, or actually the sub-lessee.
Right.
The ground lease is to the Sports Authority, and the Sports Authority leases to Walsh. Walsh is a subsidiary of the team. And in the development agreement, Icon, the bullet points, this third and fourth bullet points, I don't know if you have this or not, but it says Icon will serve as Walsh's representative, and Ron Gobble and Capital Project Solutions will serve as the authority, Metro's representatives during the construction.
Right.
Then it goes on, it says Walsh and authority will enter into a separate construction administration agreement described below, whereby Icon will essentially serve as the authority's authorized representative to manage day-to-day design and construction of the project. Is Icon the authority's representative or
Icon
representative?
Well, it's Walsh has the contract with Icon, or the team will have the contract with Icon. But in the construction administration agreement, Metro is essentially, or the Sports Authority is delegating to the team through Walsh to oversee the day-to-day construction. So they are essentially serving as the Sports Authority's agent in that respect. But you still have your own representatives who are overseeing the project as a whole to make sure that Metro is protected.
And that's Gobble Hay.
Correct,
Gobble
and
Hay
CPS.
Project Solutions.
Right.
Tell me how ICON is accountable to the authority. How do we make ICON, who's responsible for meeting these deadlines, for which the authority shall meet certain deadlines? How is ICON responsible to the authority? How does that work? How do we make them accountable to us?
Well, the team is who has the most to lose if there is a delay or something like that. So, I mean, if the team breached part of the agreement that to the Sports Authority's detriment, then we could, seek a remedy there. But there is no direct contract privity with Icon. So it's really their relationship with the team and them serving as the team's rep that make them accountable.
And what is the penalty? Just as the overall picture and not each specific agreement. What is the penalty to the Sports Authority, for instance, if we don't have it pad ready by June of 2019? What's the penalty?
There are no liquidated damages or anything that the Sports Authority would have to pay. There are no specific damages provision at all in that event. It would be based on the actual damages, and that would just have to be determined at the time. Even if theoretically you could make up the time and there wouldn't be any damages. It just depends on the circumstances. But everyone understands that the new fairgrounds buildings will be constructed and the property will be delivered ready for construction by that deadline. I'll talk about the construction timeline briefly. As mentioned, you've got the site construction commencement date would be on June 30th. Prior to that, in February, the final plans would be submitted to MLS for approval. So the final stadium plans would be sent to them for sign-off, and then construction commencing on June 30th, 2019, with a team occupancy date of February 19th, 2021. So that's the construction period would be from July 19 through February 21. As far as the construction funding sources, the Sports Authority would issue up to $225 million in revenue bonds. These would be issued later in the fall. In addition to that, you have a $25 million contribution from the team towards the cost of the stadium. And there is a separate agreement that you've already approved with the team for them to cover the design and other related costs prior to the issuance of the bonds. And that's solely the team's risk. So, I mean, they're bearing the risk of fronting those expenditures just to keep the project moving, but the Sports Authority has no obligation for those expenses if the debt isn't issued. Then you also have $25 million in Metro general obligation bonds that will be issued, and that is for infrastructure costs associated with the construction of the stadium. In addition to that $25 million, there's another $25 million in general obligation bonds for the new fairgrounds buildings, but that's separate. That's not part of this construction process. And as I said, the team is responsible for all cost overruns. So whatever that total amount is and the guaranteed maximum price. If it goes above that, they're out of pocket for all of those costs. Any questions on the development agreement? If not, I'll move to the construction administration agreement, which we've kind of already talked about, but we'll go into more detail. Kim, what tab is that?
Tab 5.
5. Thank you.
So this would be an agreement between the Sports Authority and Walsh, with Icon serving as Walsh's representative. As I said, this was determined to be the most efficient process and in everyone's best interest to make sure that the stadium is constructed on budget and on time. And Icon has the experience that Metro doesn't when it comes to overseeing these kind of projects. This construction administration concept is modeled after what Cobb County did with the Atlanta Braves recently for their new stadium. It had a similar financing structure, although the county's exposure and out-of-pocket cost is significantly greater than what Metro's will be. But the concept was the same, where the team put in a certain amount of money, the city issued the debt, and the city made some level of contribution. So Icon will be responsible for making sure that the architect and the construction manager design and build the stadium. That's the basis of this agreement. Icon will be the liaison between the Sports Authority and the architect and the construction manager, and will be required to meet regularly with the Sports Authority's representatives throughout the project. Icon's responsibilities include developing the project milestones, the timelines for when certain things have to be completed. It will also be to work with the construction manager to get the guaranteed maximum price in place, and that would be done in consultation with the Sports Authority's representatives. So that would be an agreed to guaranteed maximum price. They will be responsible for monitoring all construction costs in relation to the project budget and the guaranteed maximum price. They will be required to hold project team meetings regularly. Yes, Kim?
When you say it's, is that part of the development committee? You said it's subject to Sports Authority. Is that through the development committee process?
That would be part of it, although here we're talking more day-to-day oversight and communication. So that's really Ron Gobble and CPS. And then if there are issues, that would go to the development committee.
Because I see the change order section of this agreement says it's in accordance with the development committee process.
Right.
I guess
So
my
that,
question is, what is the process?
that will be determined once they start. They will monitor all, this is Icon again, will monitor all of the punch list completion items, assist with record keeping to make sure that everything is properly documented, to review all contractors' payment applications. So those would be submitted to the Sports Authority, but Icon would have reviewed all those to make sure that they're correct. And then if there are any change orders needed, Icon would submit those to the Sports Authority for approval. Or to the Sports Authority's reps. Yes, ma'am.
I have some questions about that process, follow-up with Kim's question. Would we get it, at what point do we get a change order if that's the cost of the stadium is more than $225 million? Is that when we get a change order?
It would be a change from the final plans, whatever the final plans are. Is that right, Tom? So if there's I don't know what those would be. I don't.
So we don't know
build.
that yet.
We don't know what those. No, I mean there may not be any. Although I would assume on a project of this magnitude, you have some change orders in construction.
So let me just give you an example. Say steel goes up, and then what was initially thought. So that comes to us. Does that come to us?
I don't know that that would be a change order. I think that would just be, if it took it over the cost, then the team would be responsible for paying for that. Right, I think it would be Mary, what would an example of a change order be?
Let's see, during the design process, maybe you located restrooms in one place, and as you went through it, you said, I got to move them 10 feet. It may or may not have a cost implication. So it could be just something with the design. And they're going to be, the construction manager is going to be working under a GMP, so you're going to have a guaranteed price. It's going to cover things such as steel and the cost of materials. But this is more of changing something within the design.
Do you have anything to add to that, Ron?
Yeah, I mean, a change order technically is any change in time or money that happens once that GMP is established. And so you'd be modifying that GMP. So they would submit it. I think the team would still be responsible for it, but it would still have to go through this process of review by the development committee and then maybe even ultimately the authority. But so, I mean, if you have a change like that or a change of some MLS standard or some other issue that comes up over the 2 years that it's under construction, after the GMP is set. But again, I think the documents, as I read them, are clear. The team is responsible for those overages at that point.
So what I'm trying to understand is that when we're underway with construction, we as a sports authority will not be weighing in to whether or not it goes over budget or not. That the documents take care of that in itself. The only thing we get is whether there is a change in design, right, for time and money.
Well, again, I'll have to rely on Ron as to what change order means in this context, in this industry, but it sounds like it's more time or money. So if the cost is going up or something's going to take longer, if those project milestones that are set, if it's going to extend beyond that.
And I think our focus, as I understand it, will be on anything that will have a capital improvement impact going on later on. So if they make a change order can go up or down. It doesn't have to be always an increase. But if they made a change order to something that would say that we would generate capital improvements or issues, some substandard HVAC system or seats or something like that, then that's where we would weigh in and be monitoring that through the process. So that's my understanding. If it deals with the design and the cost impact to implement an MLS standard, then that's the team's responsibility. Did I get it right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
So let me just ask, along those same lines, I've been through a few buildings during my time on the board here. And so one of the main things that have come up is items that have been engineered out of the original plan.
Right.
So those have been the things that come back to haunt us, and we end up with these capital expenditures that, I would be concerned that we didn't take shortcuts on the initial plan and end up 2 years, 3 years down the road, us trying to figure out how to fund that.
And that's what Ron will be monitoring and CPS to make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay.
Just as a follow-up while you're up, I had two questions. So just to summarize, what will be your and CPS's responsibilities, and what will be your authority if you see something that you don't like?
Well,
Now, let me just follow up, because I've been looking at the summary. It says there's a 4-member development committee comprising 2 representatives from the authority and 2 representatives from Walsh. And then the development committee works together throughout the design, development, and construction process. One of Walsh's representatives will serve as chair of the committee and will have the authority to make decisions in the event of a dispute among committee members, unless such decision would have a material adverse impact on the authority's future capital expense obligations. So am I correct in understanding that you come in really, and your authority and your responsibility is in overseeing what our future capital expense responsibilities will be and items that might impact that?
That's our primary responsibility, but we'll be involved all the way through the process. We will be as the design's being developed, we'll be reviewing those designs, commenting on those designs, and as well as compliance with Metro standards. And CPS will be focusing mostly on that aspect of it, of compliance and quality control and those kind of things.
Will you be making periodic reports to the authority?
Yes, sir.
So in following up, though, with what both Kathy and Dudley have said, he asked the question of what is your authority, and I get that. But I think the question also goes to, if there is something that, is time sensitive and there is a shortcut way of doing it that maybe is not what you think that should be done in that situation, so you get in an impasse, then your role is to make sure that this, for the public and for the taxpayer, that this building is in the condition that Kathy was talking about, and you will make sure it doesn't happen or come to the board or do something to make sure that we're not using materials that...
I mean, absolutely. And we've got the development committee as they defined it, and that'd be the first place we go and say, we've got an issue here.
Right.
We've got to resolve it. And hopefully that's where it'll be resolved, and I'm confident that's where most of these are going to be. If we do get to that impasse, then it's going to go to either mediation or arbitration or something like that to deal with it. But yes, our job is to look out for the authority's best interest. And they've got a lot of other issues are going on, as well as coordinating around the edges and the fairgrounds projects and all the things that have to go on in that properties as it stays operational. So, but we will definitely be there. That's our role. So, sorry.
Thanks, Ron. If there's no more questions on the construction administration agreement, I'll move on to the team lease. This is the stadium lease between the Sports Authority and Walsh.
Tab 2.
Okay, this will be also a 30-year term to mirror the ground lease term and the debt issuance. The team will pay annual rent twice a year, and the annual rent is the total amount of the debt service required for that year. Debt service is paid twice a year, and so the rent payments will be due prior to the debt payments. And so the annual rent is the total amount of debt service. Now, they will get a credit, or what the documents refer to as a rent reduction. This concept was part of the resolution approved by the council. And the rent reduction is the total amount of the ticket tax revenue and the sales tax redirect collected at the stadium. So they will get whatever we collect in those, they will get credit basically towards the rent, or that can be used to offset the rent. There is a guarantee for 10 years that those tax revenues will generate a certain amount. Again, this was all part of the council resolution. It would be, the guarantee is $4 million for years 1 through 5 and $3 million a year for years 6 through 10. So if there was a shortfall in tax revenues, that would be covered in the annual Metro operating budget. It would be not from Sports Authority revenues, but through the Metro General Fund and appropriated that way. The Walsh will be responsible for all operating and all maintenance expenses, utilities, security, everything.
I think it would be helpful, if you don't mind, on page 11, it lays out what those expenses are, which is unique to some of our other agreements in the past with teams. I think it appears much clearer. And from a board perspective, I think it would be helpful, and I don't know, Mark,
Yeah, if you,
maybe want to...
you're talking about section 4 operating expenses? Yes.
Just so the board can hear, but I know in the past, we have some issues with, what's considered capital, what's considered operating, and it's explicitly laid out in section 4, part A. So I don't know if we want to actually read those aloud or just make sure that...
I can, whatever you...
I think that would be helpful.
Okay. So operating costs would be all of the staffing costs associated with operating the stadium. Those would be the teams or Walsh's employees. Exterior window cleaning, exterior painting, facade inspections and maintenance, maintenance, repair, replacement, monitoring, and operation of all fire, life safety, and sprinkler systems, snow and ice removal, security expenses, lighting facilities, landscaping, signage, property management fees to the extent there were any, all supplies and materials needed for the operation, insurance expenses, which we'll get into later, maintenance equipment, repair, maintenance and repair of all mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems, utilities, including gas, electric, cable, internet, water, and sewer, driveway and parking area maintenance, repair, replacement, refurbishment, and general maintenance of the stadium itself as a whole, including the playing field portion. Service or maintenance contracts with independent contractors, like your HVAC contractors, electrical contractors. And really, the only thing that isn't an operating expense is what's considered a capital expense. And those are also defined, but it's in accordance with the governmental accounting standards or accounting standard principles. Any questions about the operating maintenance? On to the capital expenses. A novel part of this deal that we do not have in any of the other deals is a portion of the ticket tax will go directly to capital expenses. So we won't be in the situation where we are now with some of our facilities where they're getting some years on them and capital needs are really starting to surface, and you don't have a dedicated funding source for that. So starting in year 6 of the team lease, the ticket tax, 50 cents for year 6 and 7 and 75 cents for year 8 thereafter will be set aside specifically for capital expenses. In order to make sure that the Sports Authority knows what capital expenses will be coming, there's a requirement that they provide a capital asset management plan, and that would start in year 7 of the agreement. And that plan would be prepared by an independent consulting firm. It would be an assessment of the entire stadium and expected capital expenses over the next 10-year period. So you would have that requirement. I think it's every other year you would have a capital asset management plan submitted.
So, John, I misremember this. I thought the ticket tax was going to start from the inspection.
It does. The ticket tax will start at $1.75 day one. That will be part of the ordinance that the council approves, is establishing that ticket tax. Then in year 6, it will go to $2.25 with 50 cents for capital. Yeah. The lease includes a requirement that Nashville be used in the team name at all times and that the team maintain operations here in Nashville. They will be entitled to play up to 3 games at another location in Nashville. If for some reason they determined they needed to do one at Nissan Stadium or something, if it was some kind of special game, that would be at their discretion. But if that happens, they have to reimburse Metro for the lost ticket and sales tax revenue that we otherwise would have collected at the stadium. So if we have to come out of pocket because of them playing a game somewhere else, then they have to reimburse us for that.
And John, one other thing I think it's worth noting too is in the capital asset management plan that I guess the consultant will then also have to submit an annual budget before Metro that has to be approved each year.
Right, for the capital expenses,
So
yeah.
that would start in year 7.
Right.
And each year it would go before council and.
I would go before the authority, I think. I don't,
Well, it says, and present such budget to the Director of Finance and Metro for approval.
right, yeah, it would be the finance director signing off on that. You know, to the extent there's any out-of-pocket expense for Metro from the general fund or something, that would be part of the budget.
And John, for what reason may they want to play at a different location?
We don't think that's very likely, but it could be possible. There could be a friendly with an international team, and we think that maybe it would draw more, more than what the size of the stadium might be. So it's just to allow that flexibility, but really the stadium is the home place where all of the regular MLS games would be played.
Thank you.
To help, obviously, since the team is taking on the responsibility for the debt, they will get to keep the revenue they generate at the stadium. So that would be concessions, naming rights, advertising, and stadium event parking for their events. A lot of discussion went into scheduling coordination because the fairgrounds does have events there regularly throughout the year, and we wanted to make sure that they can continue to provide all of the events that they're required by charter to provide. So the team must use good faith efforts to accommodate fairgrounds events, specifically the flea market, because pretty much that's a fixed event. You know when those are going to be held. But they will be required to coordinate their scheduling with the fairgrounds. And the team is confident that they can do that, working with MLS to make sure we get a schedule that works for everybody. The Sports Authority and / Metro will be entitled to 20 public use days. That's significantly more than we have in the other facilities. So that would be 20 days of rent-free use of the stadium for whatever event we wanted to do. We would be responsible for paying the operating costs associated with that event, but we would not have to pay the team any rent for use of the stadium. The team is required to maintain full replacement cost insurance on the facility. So insurance requirements, obligation, that's on the team. They'll also be required to provide $50 million in commercial liability insurance, naming Metro as additional insured. They will be required to indemnify the Sports Authority for damages or injuries resulting from their operations to protect the Sports Authority from future claims or lawsuits. There is an unconditional team guarantee for all rent payment throughout the entire term for their construction capital contribution, as well as cost overruns. So they have to provide, there's a guarantee agreement incorporated into the lease that protects Metro and to make sure that all of the debt service throughout the 30 years is covered. The council added a requirement regarding the guarantee provision that in the event John Ingram is no longer the controlling owner of the team, then there would be new guarantees, successor guarantees that Metro would have to approve to make sure that Metro is protected. The team would not be allowed to assign the lease without the Sports Authority's permission. And finally, the agreement includes standard provisions that MLS requires in all MLS soccer leases, basically making them a third-party beneficiary and allowing MLS to step into the shoes of the team in the event of a default. So if the team didn't pay rent for whatever reason or something, then MLS could step in to cure the default.
Just clarify for me what you mean by no assignment.
So let's say that the team wanted to get someone else to manage the stadium. So it went from Walsh to Bob's management, then the Sports Authority would have to approve that. Any questions on the team lease?
Just on section 10, where it says right of entry and use, it talks about the authority having the right of access, but it actually never uses the term use, which, I would just foresee we would have board meetings and access to office, space for accommodating any authority meetings. I just would ask to maybe look at that in that context again.
Okay. Mary, did you hear that? Okay.
I just want to say that this is a different agreement that we have with other teams, and I really think it protects Metro in ways that we haven't seen with some of the other agreements. And to me, it's a key part of this whole agreement, and very supportive of the ticket tax, very supportive of the way the bonds are being paid. And
We've learned some lessons over the past 20, 30 years.
this is a much better deal for the city.
We think so.
I have a question about the guarantee. As I understand it, what we've got, again, is we have the Sports Authority leasing to Walsh Management, and then the team is the guarantor of that lease. And the team is an LLC, and it's not an individual.
Right.
Now, the lease provides that if John Ingram ever ceases to be a controlling owner of the team, then a successor guarantor is acceptable to the Director of Finance will enter into a guarantee agreement acceptable to the Guarantor of Finance. My question is, what is the net worth of the team right now? Because they're the ones who are guaranteeing the debt.
I don't know that. I don't know that they could say that.
That's not something I can say in this setting.
Well, the reason I ask is because there was in the guarantee, there was a provision that talked about disclosure of litigation and things, and then there was a provision that the guarantor would make disclosures if you got to a net worth of less than that set forth in Section 24. Section 24 is reserved. And so I'm just trying to figure out, I don't, first of all, I'm not questioning anybody's integrity or anything along those lines, but we've got a guarantee from an LLC, and I'm just trying to figure out who the members are, who the owners are.
So the discussion at the council when this was talked about was basically trust and faith in John Ingram and his commitment to the city, and that he will live up to what he says he will do. This is a local, well-known businessman who has strong ties with the community. So the council felt comfortable with a team guarantee as long as he was the team. It's in the event that he was no longer the controlling interest, then we would need to see, depending on the new owner, some personal guarantees and things like that. So it's really just kind of a faith and trust.
as I understand, this is a deal point that was passed by the council.
Very much so, yes.
Not necessarily a lot of discretion.
Right, a lot of thought went into that language that was heavily negotiated at the council level. Okay. Finally, I'll move on to the construction management agreement, which you do not have before you today. This is kind of a preview of what will come. This is going through the procurement process right now. This is the entity that will actually build the stadium, the contractor, developer, whatever you want to call it. That's referred to as the construction manager. And the deadline for the construction management RFP responses is, I think, July 17th. So that's coming up. And then once the bid closing date has passed, then the evaluation committee will review that and ultimately bring that agreement to the Sports Authority for approval. But it's still in the procurement process right now. They would obviously, the RFP requires that they have substantial experience on similar projects so that you make sure you're getting a construction manager that has the expertise and capacity to build the project. They would be responsible for helping Icon come up with or providing Icon with the guaranteed maximum price, responsible for completing the stadium on time and within budget. And if they did not do so, there are liquidated damages provisions based upon comparable venues where they would have to pay for any delays or be responsible for the cost the team incurs as a result of delays. So that would all be not on the authority, but on the construction manager. There are also, the RFP has a 30% DBE goal for the construction of the project. Finally, I'll talk about the council approval that will be coming. So after the Sports Authority and the Fair Board Act legislation, you've got four pieces of legislation will be filed with the council for consideration in August and September. The first will be a ticket tax ordinance imposing the ticket tax and authorizing the demolition of the existing fairground structures necessary to build the stadium. So that, by charter, that requires 27 council votes. There will also be a zoning ordinance for the rezoning of the 10-acre private development portion. That will be separate legislation that is now going through the planning process. It's been filed with the Planning Commission, and they will be considering it, and then it will go to council for public hearing and final action. There will be an ordinance approving the ground lease for the private development between the Fair Board and the private developer, which is a partner of the team, Market Street. So that's not a Sports Authority agreement. That will be with the Fair Board. So it's anticipated that first reading of, in addition to those three ordinances, you'll have the resolution approving the general obligation bonds that will go towards the project, the $25 million capital contribution for stadium infrastructure, and $25 million for fairgrounds structures. So for the ordinances, you'll have first reading August 7th, second reading August 21st, and third reading September 4th that's for the ticket tax and the demolition ordinance. And with that, I'll take any more questions.
I just like to make mention of the DBE participation. You said it would be a goal of 30%?
30%.
And so, it doesn't really read that because it just says to be established. But the likelihood of being able to meet that goal, I know with recent projects, there's been some conversation about not having enough local DBE businesses and going outside of state. And I would hope that we would really focus on local first and try to, the Tennessee area, south, And I would like for us to be successful in meeting that minimum of 30%. And that-
Absolutely.
Not just women, but blacks, African-American business as well.
And that is also an interest and concern of the council. So a great deal of attention and effort will go into satisfying that goal.
Do these agreements that you're asking us to approve, do they refer to the private development ground lease?
Not at all. No. That's totally separate.
And do these agreements, obviously there has to be a lot happen in council for them to be effective. Are they subject to, this in any way? We're just approving this and telling the council we've approved it.
Correct. And if the council doesn't approve it, then the agreements never get executed and the debt never gets issued. So the council is yeah.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Can I say just a couple of things real quickly before you leave? To Kathy, if you can hear me, to Kathy's point, with the DBE and the 30% participation goal that's been set, and that is something that we are very serious about, that I've had multiple conversations with Gobble Hayes, and as we talk about their role, part of that will be, I think, managing the DBE component and helping with reports and making sure that goes the way that it needs to go, because I think we all recognize the importance of that. And then I would also, just to really echo what John and Margaret and a couple of you have said, I think that I've been around here a long time, too, and have seen a lot of these deals. And yes, we have some things that we're going to work through, especially with the construction administration agreement and nailing that piece down and walking out that process. But I think we have, as a city, learned a lot over the last 20-plus years. And I think when we look at the ticket tax and the provision for future capital expenditures, and we look at this capital asset management plan, and we look at the reimbursement for sales tax and ticket tax that would be lost when the team plays somewhere else, I think those are all some very positive things, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.
I know Laura's with us. Is there anything you'd like to add from their board?
Just thanking John for the opportunity to do these informational sessions. I think they're key, to have the time to go over everything prior to a very important vote.
Thank you. Thank you for being here as well. Seeing no further conversation on these documents, we will come back to this same room and same wonderful facility next week on the
Next Thursday at 10:30.
Thursday at 10:30. So seeing no other business, I would move to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.